Hello everyone, welcome. In this video I'll be discussing language change. Over time, all languages change as long as the language has speakers. After all, if a language has no speakers, it becomes fossilized and it can't change. The first thing to understand is that language change is often viewed negatively by older speakers of a language, but there's nothing wrong with it. It's perfectly natural. And it might even seem random, but it's not. Just as the path of a creek may appear random, it navigates geographical contours to make its way downstream, so there is some kind of a pattern. Similarly, we can identify patterns of change at different levels of language. In this video, I'll be discussing mechanisms of language change in terms of phonology, morphosyntax, and semantics. A great many languages exist on Earth today, and languages often have multiple dialects. We can observe language variation in two ways, synchronically or diachronically. Synchronic variation involves differences among languages and dialects as they exist today. But this video concerns diachronic variation, which involves languages and dialects as they change over time. Change within a language has humble beginnings, often involving a choice in pronunciation between two words. Consider the word on the screen and how you, as an English speaker, pronounce this word. Some speakers will say either, other speakers will say either, and eventually perhaps one pronunciation will win out and future generations will abandon the other pronunciation entirely. Eventually, given enough time, we can observe large-scale changes to a language such that the early versions of that language become unrecognizable. Before we discuss some of the patterns of language change, let's turn back the clock. Here we have the Lord's Prayer from Old English, spoken about a millennium ago. This language was very different from modern-day English, and if you took a time machine back to around 1100 AD, you wouldn't be able to understand any of this. If we fast forward a few hundred years to the time of Middle English, around the time when Geoffrey Chaucer wrote Canterbury Tales, we would still struggle to understand this passage, but a few words might come into focus. If we jump ahead another couple centuries to the time of early modern English, when Shakespeare was alive and when the King James Bible was published, we can recognize much more, if not all, of this passage. Various figures throughout history have studied the change of language over time, but it's only with the arrival of one man in particular that this topic received serious academic treatment. Sir William Jones was a philologist, or someone who studies language based on written texts. He was also a noted polyglot who was reported to have spoken 16 languages fluently and had a working knowledge of another dozen. While working as a judge in India, he noticed cognates among Latin, Greek, and Sanskrit and determined that all three languages must have originated from a common source, what we now call Indo-European. Indo-European is now recognized as a family of over 400 languages, best envisioned as a tree with several large branches or subfamilies extending out from it. Although Jones may not have been the first to make this observation, he certainly popularized it and essentially started comparative linguistics, or the focus on diachronic variation. Now, let's discuss the mechanisms of language change, starting with phonological change. First, we can identify a process known as metathesis, which involves two sounds switching positions in a word over time. In each of the examples, note how the words from the earlier versions of English on the left have changed to their contemporaries on the right. In fact, we can observe metathesis synchronically in some speakers' pronunciations of words such as asterix instead of asterisk, or ax instead of ask. Next, we have a parenthesis, which involves the addition of a sound in the middle of a word over time. Again, in each of the examples, note how the words from earlier versions of English on the left have changed to their contemporaries on the right. We can also observe a parenthesis synchronically in some speakers' pronunciations of words such as escape instead of escape, or athlete instead of athlete. Next, we have prothesis, and prothesis is similar, but it involves the addition of a sound at the beginning of a word over time. In each of the examples below, note how the words from Latin on the left have changed to their Spanish forms on the right. In fact, we can observe prothesis synchronically when some first language Spanish speakers are learning English and pronounce, for example, school as eschool. Now, let's discuss a common pattern of morphosyntactic change called grammaticalization. In this process, a form in a language takes on a more grammatical function over time. For example, consider the word go in English, which started out merely as a verb of motion. Of course, it still retains this meaning, but in addition, in modern English, it can be used to indicate future tense, and tense is a grammatical category. So these days, English speakers can say, "I'm going to write a letter," and of course, they're not going anywhere. The speaker is simply indicating that they will write a letter in the future. In fact, these days, Romance languages, or languages derived from Latin, use this strategy all the time. So a Spanish speaker can say, "Voy a escribir una carta," with the meaning of, "I'm going to write a letter." Notice that voy has changed meaning over time as well. It's not just the first person singular present tense conjugation of the verb go in Spanish. It can be used to indicate future tense. Next, let's discuss patterns of semantic change, starting with broadening, which involves a word taking on a broader meaning over time. For example, in Old English, dog used to mean a specific breed of dog, likely a hound. But now, of course, dog means any old domesticated canine. Kleenex started out as a specific brand of facial tissue, but now speakers often say Kleenex to refer to any facial tissue. Holiday was used in Old English to indicate a holy day. That's where the word comes from. It used to mean a day of religious observance, but now it can also mean just a day off from work or even a vacation without any religious significance. In Middle English, aroma used to refer to the smell of herbs and spices, but these days aroma can mean any pleasant smell. In fact, for some speakers, it can mean any smell, good or bad. Next, we have narrowing, which involves a word taking on a narrower meaning over time. For example, in older versions of English, hound used to refer to any kind of dog, but now it refers to a specific breed of dog. In older versions of English, girl used to refer to any young person, but now it means a young female specifically. In Old English, wife used to mean any woman, but now it means a married woman, though its earlier meaning is retained in the modern English word midwife. In Old English, meat used to refer to any food, but now, of course, it means only flesh that can be eaten. Next, we have amelioration, which involves a word taking on a more positive meaning over time. Of course, each of these examples still retains a negative meaning, but consider instead their newer alternative meanings. Bad, dope, sick, and disgusting can all be used in American English slang to indicate positive meaning, such as when a student says, "My linguistics class is dope, yo." Okay, maybe they would never say that. Finally, we have pejoration, which involves a word taking on a more negative meaning over time. For example, in Middle English, hussy meant housewife, but now it means a brazen or immoral woman. Vulgar used to mean common, as in a later variety of Latin called vulgar Latin, Latin of the people, but these days it means gross or indecent. Pathetic used to mean deserving of sympathy, and this is the meaning that's often used in 19th century literature. But these days, it's more commonly used to indicate that someone or something is miserably inadequate. Lastly, silly used to mean happy or innocent, but now it means stupid or foolish. Okay, that's all for now. I hope you found this video useful. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.